for having invited me. It is a pleasure. I have always read with immenso piacere the books of Enzo Mingione. I have found him always stimulating and to a certain extent also provoking. I would say that I had also emotional feelings with reading the chapter of Simone Ghezzi, because I jumped back in time when I was 20 years younger, and I was working more or less on the same topic in a small district of Tuscany, and already then you could see this embedding process with ambivalent effect. I would say that there is a shared common assumption behind the three authors. Let me say that I will be basing my remarks on what I have read inside the chapters, more than what you told tomorrow, this morning. The shared assumption is that the strength of the disembedding process is increasing over the time. There is clearly a trend toward a destabilizing effect in the development of capitalism. Maybe the drivers can be a little bit different. In some chapters, there has been the mention of a service society, the financialization of the capitalism. In others, there is a stronger emphasis on the neoliberal policies. But the tendency is quite clear. There is clearly a trend toward this disembedding and an increasing instability of the capitalism. In the Simone Ghezzi chapters, the mechanism is more related to the formalization of the job market. I would say that reading Simone Ghezzi, you can understand that the process of standardization, the process of increasing the level of formalization of a job market relationship tend to disembed the local economy. Because in the past, of course, the social construction of local economy was, in a certain sense, a mix based on market relationship, but also a lot of reciprocity, and I would say also redistributive policies at the local level. So in this case, the disembedding driver is the process of formalization. In Saskia Sassen, on the contrary, there is a different underlining. The mechanism is a little bit different. It's more related to the advent of a service economy, of the financialization of the capitalism, that is accompanied by a process of informalization of a job market that tend to create a polarization in social stratification. And also there is the underlining of a downsizing, of a downgrading of the manufacturing sectors. Finally, going to Enzo Mingione's suggestive chapters, I would say that one aspect that Enzo has particularly underlined in his chapter is this lack, especially in advanced economies, of this decline of the emancipatory side of the process of commodification. In the past, the market played, in a certain sense, a positive role, not only because stimulated the process of re-embedding, but to a certain extent also the market had this emancipatory side in the job market. I found not only interesting the reading of the chapters, but also useful and to a certain extent convincing the thesis advanced by the authors. But I have been asked to do the dirt works, and so I will try to ask a few questions. And the first one is about the analytical model that you use. I am quite fond of Polanyian categories, but as you know, the economic sociologists have been a little bit criticizing the approach of Polanyi. For example, we have a little bit criticized too much what we can say an under-socialized vision of the market. To a certain extent, I would say that both the tradition coming, the schools coming from the United States, especially the new economic sociology, but also the more European tradition, the comparative political economy, have always underlined the fact that there is a process of social construction of economy, social construction of the market. So inside the logic of the market, you have to take into consideration the importance of social networks, of embeddedness, and so on and so on. I would say also that all the economy at different geographical level are a sort of variable mix of a principle of regulation. And all the comparison we tend to say is try to understand which mix is more or less viable, which mix is more or less capable to keep together competitiveness, economic growth, and social cohesion. Let me ask you the first question. Don't you see any process of re-embedding in the recent dynamic of capitalism? Because I would say the opposite, that sometimes, especially in this period, there is a sort of rediscovery of the social construction of the market, even in the epoch of financialization of the capitalism, of globalization, and so on. And I found traces of this fact also in different scientific disciplines. Let me, for example, mention economics. In economics, you find a lot of reflection nowadays on the social construction of innovation, on the national, local, and regional system of innovation. These economists are rediscovering the importance of the regulation of the state. Think, for example, at the influential books by Marianna Mazzucato. She didn't introduce anything new from the analytical point of view, but he got an incredible success in his thesis, because nowadays also the economists are recognizing the role and the importance of the institutional and regulatory context in order to understand the economic dynamics, the innovative dynamics of the firms. Or think about the recent institutional turns in the economics of development. Strangely enough, we are rediscovering, as a sociologist, the market and the disembedding aspect. Instead, the economist seems to be nowadays more aware of the importance of the quality of the institution, the quality of the governance, the long-lasting effect of the regulatory frame, and so on. Even in some papers on the International Monetary Fund, you will start to see that they are taking into consideration that in order to support and to make sustainable in the long run the development, you need to address the problem of redistribution of the wealth. Especially in third world countries, they are recognizing that if you don't address the problem of increasing inequalities, the economic growth is not sustainable. And shifting a little bit in the political economy field, for example, the rediscovery of a new developmental state, the importance of a state in constructing the process of development, not only in advanced countries, but also in third world countries. And this kind of literature is quite interesting because, for example, they tend to underline the importance of the embeddedness of these regulatory processes. For example, Danny Brenitz, who has been working on the development of countries like Taiwan, Korea, Israel, has underlined how the strategic approach of the state to the development was very different, also in terms of a strategy of constructing social alliance and embedding the action of the state. And let me conclude this overview of streams and schools of thinking that are rediscovering the importance of the regulatory aspect and the mix that are constructing the market. The research on consumerism, the consumer research, tend to see that in many different fields you have hybrid market in which the logic of the market, the logic of exchange based on the market is often mixed with different aspects, reciprocity, sharing, the gift giving, and so on. So also in this sector of research, you find that there is an important underlining. It is underlined the mixed combinatorial aspect of a process of regulation. The second question is about variability. Don't you see any variability in what you have been describing in your chapters? Because of course, I think that what has been emerging in the last years, especially during the economic crisis, is that some countries have done better than others. For example, if I think of Europe, it is evident that some countries have been able to conjugate economic growth with, to a certain extent, social cohesion, or at least the capacity to keep under control the increase of inequality. The third question is about technological change. I have not seen any one of you mentioning the importance of technological change. Instead, we have many studies and many research that are underlining also on a comparative basis that the technological dynamic is creating many of effects in terms of social inequality. Of course, technology cannot be taken into consideration by itself, but there is, to a certain extent, an acceleration of a technological change that is increasing the problem of social inequality. The last question is about the downgrading of manufacturing. Also in this case, my question is for Saskia Sassen, don't you see any tendency in the advanced countries to rethink the role of the manufacturing sectors in development? Because, for example, in Europe there is a sort of a rediscovery, also in terms of policies, of a strategical role played by manufacturing sectors in supporting long-lasting development. And I would say also in the United States, for example, in the work done by MIT research group on the role on the relationship between manufacturing and innovation, there is a sort of a reassessment of a cruciality of reshoring the productive process, because these not only permit to master the commercialization aspect of the process of innovation, but also to foster innovation, to create the basis for improving the innovation process. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Francesco, for your very, I think, very useful comments. And now, Serafino Negrelli, after your comments, I'll give the floor again to our former speaker.
Thank you. It's not so easy to discuss, to make some comments about the Saskia question, because she posed many questions today here in her relevant book on expulsion, in the chapter in the book for Enzo. So as a sociologist of work, I've chosen a question that is crucial for me, and you posed. You said, to what extent are employment-based economic insecurity and poverty intrinsic to advanced economies rather than a deviation? This is a crucial question, because behind this question there is the analytical work produced by Saskia about the idea of restructuring of economies and firms, restructuring of society and consumers, restructuring of political and works. So the process of downgrading of many manufacturing sectors and expanding informalization in many economic activities, together with the consolidation of produce services and corporate headquarters sector, recall to many ways the relevant and complex analysis in her important book on expulsion. The Saskia's main hypothesis is that not only low-wage jobs can be in function of economic growth, but also that informalization can be better understood in the context of the process of economic restructuring from old manufacturing to new service-dominated economies complex. As also Gorz pointed out, she underlines the notion of and the need of the serving class in contemporary high-income household. And as Moretti and others indicate, one high-tech job can produce one or two high-skilled jobs and other three low-wage jobs, maybe eliminating some other jobs, expulsions, and then can produce a polarization and informalization of work. In this sense, there is a rising demand for more research to define what is informal economy and what is informal work in our advanced society, and how, and for what, and where. But to give more complexity to the question, I would like to make some comments about some points, less investigating the Saskia chapter and asking for more details. When you say that a vast supply of jobs, often low paid, is an integral part of advanced economies rather than a function of the existence of a large supplies of workers with inadequate human capital and inadequate work ethic, don't you think that these two interpretations could be not so alternative? Just in our advanced society, it's more relevant to invest in human capital anyway, and this can be related to a second point. Maybe that this interpretation can be more complementary. And you underline the fact that in our advanced societies, there is a surplus of workers with a good education but no jobs. And it's true that on the basis of many data, workers actually bring to jobs more knowledge, more creativity, responsibility, and social capital, more than recognized by formal labor contracts. But I think that it is also important to stress the fact, on the basis of many data, that more educated people have more opportunities to be less unemployed and better paid in general anyway. About Ghezzi. In the Ghezzi analysis, we can appreciate the idea to see the transformation of small business economy through the lens of or the key approach of the double movement between embeddedness and disembeddedness. The characteristics of our industrial districts and the career paths of old entrepreneurs, from young workers to skilled employers, are very well described. But in some points, I think that the rigidity of this theoretical framework can pose a problem. For example, only two examples. For example, it could be difficult to accept the extension of the temporary layoffs indemnity in the small firms as a process of disembeddedness. On the contrary, for me, why cannot we see it as a form of re-embeddedness? Could you explain better this different interpretation? A second related problem is about the meaning of the transformation of this difference between the latch door of the old family values of the first generation of small entrepreneurs and the deregulated new small firms. Again, paternalism was really better than today's situation. I quoted your proposition, deciding in a unilaterally way to dismiss before married women and younger people or someone who had exasperated the employer was or is really better. difficult to call this reciprocity or informal rule and not all the paternalistic way. In this sense, I think is a form of paternalistic human resource management. And this may be that not so much has changed in this situation. Last, Mingione. Mingione starts from the Polanyi idea that commodification opens a deficit of social protection and obliges individuals to reconstruct social bonds. That is the same crucial sociological question posed by Durkheim or by Coleman more recently about how the function and the importance of legacy. But Mingione makes his analysis of tensions in contemporary dynamic capitalism, applying in a convincing way the Polanyi concept of the double movement. In this way, he explained the individual vulnerability, increasing social inequalities, more dramatic with the financialization of economy, the standardization of jobs, employment instability, and the complex situation for women and immigrants, welfare entrenchment, and so on. His thesis is that in a global commodification, there are great difficulties in finding the means and resources to face the disembodied impact, or great difficulties faced by the advanced welfare systems in preserving universal levels of protection. It is not clear to me, and this is the first question for Enzo, his position, the position of Enzo about the trends of capitalist development, because it is in struggle between, on the one side, the definite unsustainability of this development, because the re-embedded process is unable to protect large and increasing groups of individuals. And on the other side, the possible last chance for re-embedded institutions and organized agencies to oppose oppression and discrimination. If the first way, there is something very near to the Streeck solution position of coming back to nation-state protection. If the second way is near to the idea of a possible social regulation beyond the boundaries of national states, that is the Habermas position. And in this latter way, a social regulation beyond states, EU, but not so much, could not be interpreted as a form of Polanyi re-embeddedness. And the second question, but at the end of his chapter, we find another not less important part about local welfare. That seems to me to recall the idea of the social division of welfare by Richard Titmuss, between social, fiscal, and occupational welfare, or between state, the first state, and the second welfare. Enzo says that some solidarity and protection initiatives may become the last resort for defending particular groups of citizens in competition with other groups. Is this a different idea, this is the question, of possible competitive forms of re-embeddedness? Thank you.
I think there are a lot of stuff here. I don't think you will be able to answer to all these questions anyway, because I think that you have 9 minutes each. Well, 9 minutes.
We're losing ground. It used to be 10 minutes,
yes,
was the typical. But so well,
there will be 10.
I understood.
There will be 10.
Yes. Well, thank you very much to both commentators. Really, molte grazie for such a detailed analysis. So I just am going to pick up on a few points because otherwise I cannot do it. So the question, both of you raised a question that has to do in a way with a higher level of complexity in many jobs and the fact that our societies are generating larger strata of highly educated people. And yes, I agree with that. The problem is that we do have, and maybe the United States is exhibit number one in its brutality. Louder? Oh, I'm sorry. See, it's so closer, right. So in the United States we have battalions of educated people, including with doctorates from good universities, who are basically doing jobs, either teaching in 15 different classes in different universities or schools, or are simply unemployed, or are doing jobs that are way below. Now, you raised, I think both of you signaled, isn't it better to have a lot of highly educated people than not having, people, or not highly, but people with good educations? Of course that is better, but we cannot overlook the fact of the amount of wasted talent. And when you look at a country like the United States, again, exhibit number one, we now have about 3,000 universities that are for profit. They're interested in educating people because it's money. Of course, some of them are fictions. So there is some romantic notion about education and the worth of it and highly intelligent people, blah, blah, that we need to deal with because something is not going well. Now, the second point is that when it comes to highly complex jobs, there are also, rather than the less complex jobs which are often being outshored, but even if you look at highly complex settings, let's say, we have two types of workers very often. One are brilliant techies, and the other ones are people who know a very limited technology, like in warehouses, etc. So I have been, since that then looks, okay, both are doing okay. Are there any negatives attached to being the lower level worker? That was my question. I went to law cases, courts, where an accident happens in both places. So now again, I'm talking about the United States, but these are real facts, real data, so that's why I invoke them. When you're a high level techie, the system wakes up, invents new laws, etc. You're protected. Mostly you will win the case, partly because the judges don't even get it. When you're a low-wage worker, guess what? You're automatically guilty. So an accident happens on the workplace, you're guilty. Now that's the US. The US is absolutely brutal. It is absolutely brutal when it comes, to half of the population, basically, sort of lower. So there you have a situation where high technology might be a great thing to have, but it has not precluded, and that's all I'm saying, it has not precluded an absolute downgrading of the quality of life of those workers and the options that they have to make their case. They don't even get that option. And the knowledge factor hangs in there. That is one issue that I quickly wanted to say. The issue of literatures, that was especially your case. All these literatures about this and that, I must tell you, I don't mean to be brutal. I'm Dutch and I am a bit brutal, inevitably, because the Dutch, are not intermediated cultures. A lot of that stuff belongs to an older era. There is a lot of literature that, in my view, simply is not getting what is happening. And one of the reasons, it's not that they don't know the little details about this work situation and that work situation. No, it's that there are other, now this is now me the theorist, so you can really disagree with that and I may be 100% wrong or 70% wrong or whatever. I agree with that too, that possibility. But I see these new vectors organizing our economies. The Polanyi economy version and all of that, it's added a lot of complexity to the notion of what is an economy, and we all are great admirers of that. But it seems to me that today, when we speak about the economy, we really need to ask, what are we speaking about? Part of that economy does function the way it has been described. I think there is another element in that economy that simply has not been incorporated. Those logics have not been incorporated into a lot of the analyses of the economy. And frankly, one way of thinking about it is that there are multiple economies. And some of these economies are reasonable, some are not. Now, I want to end with a kind of juxtaposition, Germany and the US. Germany is amazing. Germany has enabled all kinds of very small, long-lasting businesses who do maybe the ultimate pencil, the ultimate kind of paper for whatever, and they export to the world. I think that is a great economy, right? In the United States, pencils, hey, we ship them up to there or whatever. We know what I'm talking about. So it could be done, but there are very few countries that have somehow enabled that. And enablement is, of course, a major challenge here. So if we could do that, I would say and that comes back to the highly educated workers, and the desirability of having highly educated populations. That is a foundational element. But the problem is that the other links are missing. Now, again, Italy has far more still of the craft working than say a country like the United States has. So now I want to make one little final observation, and that is the phenomenon of franchising that was not mentioned by you, nor does, I think, Pogliani have a notion of franchising. What is franchising? So if I need a computer, I need a franchise. Otherwise, I have to go to the factory, right? But do I need franchising for everything else? So two little examples that I really think capture something. The old-fashioned flower shop, you probably still have that. Very modest selling flowers, right? Very modest operation, but those people had to know about accounting, they had to know about law, they had to know what flowers when, what do people, there was knowledge. It was a knowledge operation. When it's a franchise, they just get it, they have zero knowledge, and they sell it on, with part of the profit leaving the locality, that's a second issue, and going to headquarters. So there are two issues. One is the loss of knowledge spaces that are local. Now, Italy is still amazing in that sense, because you have a lot of that, right? But in many parts of the world, and say Barcelona is now stop all franchises, right? Because it's a disaster. It sort of is avoiding. So one notion that I have been working on is the relocalizing at the neighborhood level, whatever the quartier, whatever the notions, of forms of economic activity that are necessary but can be handled at that level. And again, it's not necessarily the computer, but it's so much of the rest. Franchising has become an extractive logic. It keeps extracting. We need to go back to the little local bank. We need to go back to all kinds of, because that is one way of recapturing types of economies that then could become, in an idealized and a better world, more like the Polanyi notion, with their own contradictions. Yes, I stop. Thank you very much. Sorry. I know. Grazie. Io ho imparato moltissimo. Ah, yeah.
Okay, now.
Yes, I will.
Ghezzi?
Yes.
Please.
Yeah, we'll start out with Serafino Negrelli's question regarding the rigidity of the model. Okay, sorry. Well, I think what is interesting in the concept of embeddedness and disembeddedness is that, at least in my case, is the paradox of disembeddedness. So what I'm trying to show is that there's disembedding phenomena that may have an embedded-like effect. One of that is the example I make is the redundancy. When the entrepreneurs start take the decision of firing or making someone redundant. Now, as I said in the chapter, there's this kind of paternalistic way of ranking people who will lose their job, temporarily job. And this kind of ranking is basically the result of an embedding, its effect on embeddedness. When people start using their own values,
the values of the community, the culture in which they are embedded, the decision they come up with, is not so much an economic one, but becomes a cultural one. In the example I made was the case of two firms, the firms that had to deal with the crisis in 1996 and in 2008, 2009. And what happened in the two cases? In the first one, you see how embeddedness works. In those cases, you see people starting in those who lost their job. First were the youngest, those without families, and then without children. Okay, there's a sort of ranking system that is basically that comes out of the notion of family, the value of having a family, and the notion of paternalism. But paternalism is a component of the embeddedness. Okay, which means that you privilege the social aspect rather than the economic aspect in this case. Now, what happened 20 years later? Well, the entrepreneurs don't have to resume this ranking system, culturally determined, because now they have a tool that comes from the regulation, the formal regulation, which is this what we call the government temporary layoffs indemnity. And in that case, they don't have to rely of those kind of decision based on the values they bear. The decision is based no longer in formal regulations on those familistic arrangements, but they're based basically on very formal decisions. So we have a tool, and this tool could be used without taking into consideration those values that I mentioned earlier. So, and that's, I think, it's a paradox. It's a way you're relieved, you're freed from those kind of decisions that were bound you. And I think this is a paradox. It's an effect of this embeddedness, but it's not a negative effect to a certain extent. The other aspect, the other area where you could see this paradox is in the hiring procedures, in the employment. Deployment in the early 1990s, the employment was still based on the sociality, on the fixed sociality, on personal knowledges, personal relations, and there was no intermediate institution that would regulate the hiring system. Now you have many temping agencies. You have a lot of self-employed or semi-self-employed artisans, which are former workers, who are available and are being hired for short-term periods. And this is done through a very formal system of hiring, of employment. And again, this is another way of seeing how this embeddedness turns into a disembedding phenomenon, because you are not longer bounded by this strong and thick society with the community when it comes to hire people. You have to, you demand, you decentralize, you externalize this kind of relationship, and so therefore, when it comes to fire people or lay off people. You don't have to. It's a much. It's a decision that is no longer seen as a struggle, as a very engaging, because you have a direct relationship with the person that is that you have been hired, and you have a strong connection. In this case, all those components are disappearing. And the other, then coming back to Francesco's questions, one that was I found very interesting to my research is the embedding processes, because I focused on these embedding processes, and they don't necessarily have a negative connotation in my field. However, I see some embedding processes taking place, but we don't know to what extent this will turn into something major and something more, it could go into an institutionalized behavior. For example, dealing with one example I could give you is that now entrepreneurs are establishing a relationship with other business partners without engaging in any contract that includes monetary exchange. Now they have these networks where they exchange favors, okay? They exchange services through a system of credit. So you accrue credits and you spend credits with other entrepreneurs. So, and that's without the use of money at all. So this is another very interesting phenomenon that is happening. And I think it helps to understand how this is another, in Nuce, you see an embedding phenomenon that is taking place. Now, to what extent this is going to spread and become institutionalized, we don't know. But what I could say is that this is certainly something highly innovative that is coming from the crisis. And the crisis is teaching us this, that after the crisis, we could start seeing innovative initiatives, socially granted, that are actually a consequence of that period. So that this crisis actually should be quite interesting for us as a social analyst, because you see here how, although the crisis has perhaps passed, but the scars and the marks of the crisis are still functioning, and that could be very interesting for us to develop. So, okay, thanks.
Well, thank you, Ghezzi. Now the final, yes. So, the final words. The final are for. No,
out of the call. I'm trying to be very provocative, and as it is the final of the morning, you will not have time to react to what I say. I know. So I certainly agree with Francesco that the original work of Polanyi was rigid and certainly non-attentive to social agencies. But, and this was particularly true in the Great Transformation, that was very important, is still now a very important contribution, but it is a very important contribution with some sort of limits due to its emotion. And the idea that, look, how capitalism, how the market societies are producing some sort of a social disaster, and the response to this social disaster may be fascism and Nazism. And that is some sort of the short background of it. In a way, some sort of the theoretical apparatus is much more flexible and very much oriented in explaining the social construction of the market and of the market societies, we call it, through some sort of the response, the always re-embedding responses of redistribution, reciprocity, institution, and the market as an organization. So there is an idea implicit in the Polanyi approach, in my Polanyi approach, that the market is double, is competition, destroying society, and it is some sort of a social construction, rebuilding some sort of social network. And the factory is a social network, built by the market, and in a way it is in tension with the market as a competitive institution. And so you always, any firm will tell, well, we want to keep the workers, even if, or we don't want to keep the workers, even if they are less productive, because this gives us stability, and this is what we work. And our enterprise works as a family, and we make publicity that our good may be more expensive, but they are good for the people, and all these kind of things like that, which means how the social economy is built. So, in a way, if you want, the Mazzucato as an example is a very good example of how some sort of the interaction between the state and the economy is going. I take it a lot, I like it a lot. It is also an under-socialized way of looking at it. And I agree with you, the variability is very high, because the re-embedding is variable, and the human agency struggling against oppression is variable, and it is delayed in time, organized in different way, and so on. So this is a point on which we are, and it is very interesting to work on that. I skip technology. I have mostly considered not the productive technology, but the communication technology, because I think they are some sort of an interesting part of our action. So we are activated also through this technology, which doesn't mean that the advanced communication technology are building some sort of intermediate bodies. So they are not. So we are more and more without good intermediate bodies that organize our agency life. So one thing which has always been impressing me is the debate on disembeddedness, and the fact that disembeddedness from an analytic point of view doesn't exist. And whatever you think, it's a very chaotic society, somehow, the Victorian labor market in the UK. It was very poorly embedded. People had to beg in the street, to recourse to some sort of charitable aid, but this is a way of re-embedding. It is not what you cannot make a research on disembedded sort of things. Briefly, to conclude, not enough resources. In a very heterogeneous and unstable society, which is a global society where the rate of growth is much higher in the emerging countries than in our countries, and where all the money is going, not the money, you are right, Saskia, all the resources are going to the financial control. There is very little possibility to protect the population, a large part of the population, both in the emerging countries and in different ways, and in the highly industrialized countries, including the great success example of Germany, where Germany had an enormous increase of poor workers and an enormous increase of people that don't have a house, for instance, in the last, after the labor market reforms. It's doing very well, they're very competitive, they are exploiting their neighbor, Eastern European neighbor, labor market, and at the same time, they are producing a lot of inequalities, more inequalities. So this is why Wolfgang Streeck is pessimist, because he lives in Germany, he looks at the very good model, and he is pessimist. So at this point, what is the local welfare? It is a problem of rescaling. We have to discuss, well, I don't want to discuss it here, but we have to discuss the fact that some sort of the Western modernity has been built by an institution, the nation state, that was invented even before industrialization, and that became, as Weber said, became crucial to build our society, but not the state everywhere, and not the state forever. So we are now closing a period in which, in some context, the nation state has been very useful to govern the commodification process. Now it is no longer. And in that sense, the new welfare is perhaps built on different, some sort of solidarity group that are more local and so on. And that to say that it is an open question. This may mean that the commodification process and the double movement stops, or is more limited than in the past, and that the new order, the interregnum, as some of my French scholars say, is built outside the commodification process. This is a possibility, but most of the social innovation are also part of the commodification process, in order to say something.
Thank you very much. You're a danger is a good conclusion. I don't know. Anyway, now here, thank you very much for your participation. And now there is a lunch break, and then works will start again. I don't know at what time, but I don't
Say 2 o'clock.
at 2 o'clock there will be the second session. 1 hour.
1 hour lunch.
Yes.
Is decent.
Yes.